Welcome to the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Owens, and today we're going to walk through a really interesting 2023 paper from JAMA Network Open about using a voice-based conversational AI for insulin management in type 2 diabetes. And then we're going to put on our governance hats, and we're going to tear it apart a little bit, but constructively. And we're going to talk about how we might change our approach in 2026 versus 2023. So let's get started. This is going to be fun. First of all, what is this paper? This is a randomized clinical trial run at Stanford from 2021 to 2022. They recruited 32 adults with type 2 diabetes who needed to either start or adjust their basal insulin. It's a pretty standard population. The average age was 55, about 60% women, baseline hemoglobin A1C around 9.6%, which is definitely not optimal control. The intervention group got an Amazon Echo speaker loaded with custom voice AI software. This is the only AI that's in this study. We're going to dive into that a little bit. So everyday patients would say, Alexa, check in with clinical trial. And then they would have a conversation with their smart device where they would report their fasting blood glucose and their insulin dose for the day. The voice agent would then give them updated dosing instructions based on pre-approved titration protocols from their clinicians. That titration algorithm is deterministic. So that's not AI. The only AI is the voice agent. The titration algorithm was based on rules that were validated by the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists and the American College of Endocrinology. And it included emergency protocols to handle both hypo and hyperglycemia. So the intervention group, their real intervention was the provision of this voice AI software to carry out this rules-based algorithm for insulin titration. The control group got standard care, which meant in this case that they also got a speaker, but it reminded them daily to fill out an online blood glucose and insulin log. This group saw their doctor when they normally would, which averaged out to about 1.3 visits over this 8-week study period. And the results of this were interesting. The group that had the AI on their speakers hit optimal insulin dosing in 15 days. More than half of the control group never got there in the full 56-day study. Insulin adherence, which is the extent to which a patient follows their prescribed insulin regimen, was 83% in that AI group versus 50% in standard care. And 81% of the AI group achieved glycemic control compared to 25% of the control group. And the AI group also saw improved diabetes-related emotional distress scores. So there's a nifty little validated tool that measures how stressed are you feeling about your diabetes. And the AI group saw improved distress scores. So this study has some strengths and some weaknesses. There's a few things that I really like about it. I know it is small, but they did do a randomized control trial. That's kind of cool. They measured adherence, they looked at clinical outcomes, and they looked at patient-reported outcomes like the emotional distress. The AI group got an average of 7.3 automated insulin adjustments over 8 weeks compared to 1.6 in the control group. That frequent titration is actually what the guidelines recommend, but it is harder to achieve in practice because of the inertia, it's called therapeutic inertia, of communicating with your doctor either in person or via like an EHR portal. I really appreciate that the study also reported on safety. They documented non-severe hypoglycemic episodes. There were 11 in the AI group and 10 in the control group. Those in the AI group, they were all handled autonomously by reducing the dose. They documented no severe adverse events in either group. But this paper also has some weaknesses. First of all, this was a small study, 32 people, 16 per arm. This is proof of concept. This is not like a really well-powered statistical study. Secondly, I'm a little curious the 8-week time frame. Diabetes is a chronic condition, so I'm very interested in what happens as we're on-ramping people to manage their new chronic condition. But we also need to know what happens at 6 months, what happens at a year, what happens when you get so tired of taking your blood sugar every day and you got to take this insulin every day. And will people keep talking to Alexa, or will the engagement drop off a cliff like we see with a lot of digital health tools? When it's not new and shiny anymore, will you still use it? Third, I have questions about the control group. Their outcomes actually got worse. Their mean fasting blood glucose went up by 23 milligrams per deciliter. That leaves an opening that I wish the paper had kind of closed. Do new diabetes patients often struggle with getting their fasting blood glucose under control like this? How well does the control group in this study parallel standard care? And then my real question that I wanted to ask, there's no information here about the patient experience beyond the survey scores. And there is definitely no information about how their providers felt about this. So I want to know, what did patients really think about talking to Alexa every day? What were their technical difficulties? What were the technical difficulties? The paper mentions that 5 out of the 16 patients in the AI group contacted the research team with technical questions. What were those questions? I would want to know that if I were implementing this at my health system. Did the providers all log into the web portal to review the titrations? We know that some of them did. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But did they all look at them? Did they agree with the titrations? That's really important for ensuring that the system is human in the loop, or that's not really the way that this study was designed. But if we were looking at a similar implementation for a different condition that required human in the loop, we'd want to make sure, hey, what are the barriers to providers reviewing this information? Okay, so let's imagine we're going to go back to Jenny's totally fictional health system. And this exact study is going to come across my desk in my role as AI governance at Jenny's totally fictional health system. And a clinical team is red hot for my approval to pilot this technology. Here's how I would approach this. The first question that I'm going to ask in the year 2026 rather than 2023 is, why are we using an Amazon Alexa? Why are we using Alexa specifically rather than a non-Amazon smart speaker? And the answer is that Amazon's position on HIPAA has changed in the intervening time. So the paper says that the AI was powered by Alexa, which at the time was a HIPAA-compliant conversational AI platform by Amazon. That's because in 2019, Amazon launched a HIPAA-compliant skills program. It was a program where developers could build Alexa skills that used protected health information. So this study ran from 2021 to December 2022. So that was during the window when this third-party developer HIPAA-compliant Alexa platform was available. But right as the study was wrapping up in December 2022, Amazon ended support for that third-party development of HIPAA-compliant Alexa skills. So all the existing ones were suppressed. Developers can no longer do it. Amazon says that any protected health information associated with those skills was deleted. Amazon's current position is that HIPAA-eligible skills can only be developed through first-party resources, that's the hospital itself, and only through their Alexa Smart Properties for healthcare, which is focused on selling Alexa devices directly to hospitals and providers for in-facility use. So the development that was done at the time of this paper is no longer really practical. So if this proposal came to me today in 2026, I would have a lot of questions about why are we using Alexa, especially since Amazon has demonstrated that they're willing to cut the HIPAA support for Alexa tools if it doesn't align with their business strategy. I'd also have a lot of questions about when we're relying on a cloud platform, how do we feel about data governance? What happens to all the other information that Alexa is capable of collecting? What if a person doesn't quite understand how the smart speaker works and they connect it to their Amazon account? There's a lot of considerations for data governance here, and also considerations for patient trust. Some patients might be uncomfortable with Amazon being in the loop on their medical care, especially Alexa's got a lot of privacy concerns. So at the time, Alexa was ubiquitous, the developer tools were mature, the HIPAA compliant program was available, but that convenience came with governance trade-offs that today we would probably not greenlight. You could build this on a vendor-neutral platform, or you could use a purpose-built medical device that isn't tied to a specific platform. Second question, what patients does this help? This paper shows that AI tools like this can help people who need frequent insulin titration but who aren't getting it, which is a lot of people. The American Diabetes Association estimates that 1.5 million Americans are newly diagnosed with diabetes every year. The therapeutic inertia problem is real. People go a long time between dose adjustments when they could be adjusting weekly or even more frequently. But looking at this paper, who specifically benefits from this AI speaker-based tool? The patients who achieved glycemic control in the AI group logged data 54 out of 56 days. So this study helped patients who were engaged. It helps patients who had access to an internet-connected device, the ability to speak clearly enough for voice recognition, digital literacy to troubleshoot basic tech issues, setting up a smart speaker, and consistent enough daily routines to remember to check in. Okay, so who might not be in that group? Patients with limited English proficiency. The study was English only. Patients with significant vision or hearing impairments, if you can't hear the speaker talking to you or if you can't see the speaker to find it. Patients who have unstable housing or a lack of reliable internet. If you need access to power, access to internet. If you're moving from place to place, this may not be the solution for you. What about a work schedule that doesn't allow a daily check-in, like a patient who is working swing shift? That's going to pose a problem for their daily insulin shots. It's going to pose a problem for a daily check-in as well. And then what wasn't really clear was the expectation of the study team. Was this the patient themselves doing the check-in? What about a caregiver who might be administering the medication? So right away, I'm thinking about equity, right? This is a tool for a specific population. And that's fine. Not every tool has to work for everyone, but we do need to be careful about who we're serving and who we're potentially leaving behind. And really critically, how many of those 1.5 million new diagnoses each year would be helped by this, and how many would not? Which brings me to my question number 3. Does this catch and support patients we would otherwise miss, or does it make care more convenient for people who were going to be doing fine anyway? And the paper doesn't really tell us an answer to this. The inclusion criteria were adults with type 2 diabetes requiring initiation or adjustment of once daily basal insulin. So we don't know if these are patients who historically struggled with medication adherence, or if they were motivated patients who would do well with any innovate. What I would want to see in a pilot at my totally fictional health system is explicit targeting of patients who have struggled with glycemic control despite being on insulin. So can this help patients who are already sort of not being served by our existing techniques to get patients' blood sugar under control? Show me this works for the patients who need it the most and not just the patients who are easiest to engage. And then my 4th question, it's kind of the systems biology question. How does this automated titration notification play out when you're doing it in a health system that has more than one AI tool? The paper says when the AI recommends a dose adjustment, it notified the clinician via the study's web portal. In a real implementation, in a real health system, that's probably going to mean an inbox message in your EHR. So let's take a step back. So we're increasingly seeing health systems deploy AI tools for triaging in-basket messages, flagging high-risk patients, prioritizing which results might need immediate attention, maybe drafting messages back. So now you've got multiple AI systems all trying to grab that clinician attention. I would want to know, how do these automated titration alerts get prioritized against other alerts in the in-basket system? If we have an AI system that might be deprioritizing routine medication adjustments because it's trying to surface acute issues, does this one get buried? And in this case, it doesn't matter so much because self-titration of insulin doesn't require necessarily a doctor's blessing before you move forward with the dose. But what happens if this does get deprioritized, it gets buried, and then the patient ends up waiting longer to make a change? And then, of course, my constant question, who is responsible for monitoring the AI, both on an individual level and on a system level? So a single AI tool might work great in isolation, but what happens when you throw it into an environment where you have 10 other AI tools that are all competing for one provider's attention? We need an orchestration layer on this, and we need to make sure that that orchestration layer is working in compliance with our medical, our ethical, and our organizational priorities. So if you're a clinician at Jenny's Totally Fictional Health System and you're really excited to bring this in for a pilot, what are you going to do differently from this paper? And it goes back to my standard 3-part framework. Does the tool do what it sets out to do? Does it have the impacts you thought it would? And do the people feel those impacts the way you hoped? So let's start with the technical performance. Does the technology actually work as specified? The paper actually is pretty clear on this. So they tell us that the AI successfully delivered 7.3 automated dose adjustments on average. Patients logged data 89% of the time overall, 96% of the time for those who achieved glycemic control, yay! And the AI handled 11 episodes of non-severe hypoglycemia autonomously by reducing doses. Very cool. What the paper doesn't tell us: voice recognition accuracy. How often did Alexa misunderstand the patients? Do we know that what was reported was actually the measurements that were taken? System availability. Were there outages? Were there connectivity issues? And then those technical support contacts. The people who reached out to technical support, what broke? What were they having problems with? What did they need support with? If you're piloting this, you need to measure not just did the outcome happen, but also how often did the technology fail to do its basic job? Okay. Second, clinical impacts. The paper measured a lot of the right things. They looked at the time to optimal insulin dose. That was their primary outcome. They looked at insulin adherence. They looked at glycemic control, and they measured patient-reported diabetes-related emotional distress. And that last one is particularly important. Diabetes management is exhausting. This is a chronic condition that you are thinking about every time you want to eat or drink. The paper shows that the AI group had reduced distress. Their scores went down by almost 2 points, while the controlled group's distress increased. It went up by 1.7. They found this to be statistically significant. Here's what I would add if I were recommending this for a study at my own health institution. Look at the clinicians too. How much time did the clinicians spend reviewing the AI's recommendations? Did it actually reduce their workload, or did it shift it to a different kind of monitoring? I would also probably run the study longer, and I'd want to look at A1C as well as fasting blood glucose, just because I think this is important to look at. So do the impacted populations feel that impact as you'd hope? Okay, let's talk about the lived experience of people using this technology. The paper includes survey data on attitudes towards technology and medication adherence, which is a start, but surveys have limitations. I would love to see some qualitative interviews. I'd love to sit down with patients and say, what was it like to talk with Alexa every day? Is it helpful? Is it annoying? Would you do this for every day for the rest of your life? I'd be so curious to look at longitudinal follow-up. What happened after 8 weeks? Do people keep using it? I mean, in this case, probably no. They probably had to return the speaker at the end of the study. I'd also want to bump up our patient population against some age brackets or some other breakdowns in groups. So did older patients have different experiences than younger ones? If you're living alone, do you have a different experience than those who are living with a family member? Another thing that I wanted to pull from the paper that kind of hints at the patient experience, the paper mentioned that 11 out of the 16 patients in the AI group had no contact with the research team after enrollment. And that's actually really encouraging. It suggests that the technology was usable enough that most people didn't need help. But 5 patients did need help. They reached out to the study team between 1 and 5 times, and we had 1 patient who reached out 5 times for support. What was going on there? Was it the same issue over and over again, or was it 5 different problems? I would want to dive into this because this is an important leading metric for implementation challenges if you're rolling this out to more than 32 patients. Clinician feedback. The paper is silent on this, and that's a really big gap for me. We know that 4 out of the 16 patients in the AI group had their protocol adjusted by their clinician during the study. 3 times they changed parameters like the target glucose range. 1, they manually increased a dose. So that means that clinicians were watching and intervening with needed. Did all of the clinicians log into the portal? Did they all look at it? What did they think about it? Did they feel confident trusting this approach? Did they feel like they had adequate visibility into what was happening? Did they trust the titration algorithm that was validated by the endocrinology groups? Did the web portal give them the information they needed to make those decisions? So if you're a clinician piloting new tech, you need to design in some feedback loops for yourself and your team. Not just did it work, but would we want to keep doing this? And what if we did this for every patient, for every condition? I just had this image of a patient with like 5 or 6 comorbid conditions with 5 or 6 different Alexas all lined up on their kitchen counter, all reminding them at different things. And this is not scalable. We need a more unified solution here. Okay, so let's wrap this up. This paper shows that a voice-based AI for insulin titration can work, at least in a controlled trial setting for 8 weeks with a specific population of engaged patients. The clinical outcomes are encouraging, and the technology handled safety issues autonomously. If this came to me for governance review at my totally fictional health system, I would have some questions. So questions about vendor risk. Why Amazon? What happens if they change their strategy? They already did. Equity. Who are we helping? Who are we leaving behind? And is there a way to make sure that we're not leaving behind the patients who need us most? Ecosystem. How does this interact with all of our other AI tools? Long-term viability. What happens after 8 weeks, after a year? Let's make sure that we're measuring what matters. And please, let's not pick a technology platform just because it's convenient. I want to be clear about something. I am absolutely in support of this kind of innovation in healthcare. We really need better ways to manage chronic conditions. The status quo, where patients see their provider every few months, get a medication adjustment, and then struggle with adherence in between, is not serving patients well. Empowering patients to follow well-documented, clinically validated protocols with the guidance of technology, rather than requiring the hands-on efforts of their provider for every single adjustment, that's a solution that will scale, and it serves patients and it empowers them. I found this paper to be a particularly interesting choice because self-titration of insulin is generally considered acceptable practice with appropriate patient education and protocol guidance. There's tons of evidence supporting it. Clinical guidelines explicitly recommend it. But not all chronic conditions are like this. If you apply the same autonomous adjustment model to, say, like anticoagulation therapy, like what if you're basing your warfarin dosing based on INR levels? This is a little insane because not many people have a point of care INR test available to them, but let's go with it. Let's say that you wanted to try this. You're in much riskier territory. The therapeutic window is narrower. The consequences of getting it wrong are more severe. You can have bleeding. And the standard of care typically requires direct licensed provider oversight for dose changes. The same with immunosuppressants for transplant patients or antiarrhythmics for cardiac conditions. The level of clinical judgment required and the risk tolerance for autonomous adjustments varies dramatically by condition and medication class. So as you're innovating, make sure you're innovating with your eyes open about the regulatory landscape you're operating in and whether the clinical protocols you're automating are actually appropriate for automation in the first place. In last week's episode, we talked about FDA regulation of software as a medical device versus FDA position on clinical decision support. And how you implement a tool like this matters enormously for that distinction. If the AI is making autonomous dose adjustments and the clinician is monitoring after the fact, that is human on the loop. The human is supervising but not approving each decision. If the AI recommends a dose adjustment and requires clinician approval before it goes into effect, that's human in the loop, where the human is an active decision maker for each recommendation. FDA treats these scenarios very differently, as we know. In this study, the AI was operating autonomously with pre-approved protocols, which leans towards human on the loop, but in this case it's appropriate because self-titration is clinically recommended. For cases where this kind of patient autonomy is less accepted, this approach may require more robust validation, risk management documentation, and probably FDA clearance, depending on how it's marketed and deployed. I am not just being a pedantic killjoy here for fun, even though I love being a pedantic killjoy. Design decisions have real implications for liability, and for what kind of validation you need to do before deployment, and for how you're going to govern a tool like this, both in the review period and after it's live. Thank you for listening. This was a lengthy one. I had a lot to say. Really appreciate you tuning in to this week's edition of the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Owens. Major hat tip to Aida McCracken, who helped me work through a lot of my thoughts and feelings about this particular paper in our discussion.